At the end of the 7th century in the northeast of England, there were two monasteries which were major centres of Anglo-Saxon culture and Christian teaching. These were situated at one at the mouth of the River Wear, the second at Jarrow, and these were the work of their founder, a man called Benedict Bishop. Bishop was born into a noble family in the northeast of England. He attended the court of the king. He served in the army, but in his early 20s he gave up the noble life that he'd been born into and embraced Christianity and set off for Rome, where he wanted to study the teachings of the apostles, and he became a monk and spent the next 10 years in a variety of monasteries all over Italy and to an extent in Gaul as well, where he studied the Benedictine monastery traditions there, but also he collected religious artifacts, religious paintings, and in particular books. When he returned to the northeast of England eventually, he spoke with the King of Northumbria, King Extant, and showed him the various artifacts that he brought back and described his experiences in Rome. And Extant was suitably impressed and gave him an area of land at the mouth of the Wear and told him to build a monastery. And Benedict Bishop wanted to build a substantial monastery to give it an air of permanence. Most monasteries in England at that time were made of wood, but he wanted, having studied the classical architecture in Rome, he wanted a stone monastery. But he had to go to Gaul, to France, to employ stonemasons to come and build the monastery for him. He also wanted glazed windows. Buildings in Britain at that time didn't have any glass in the windows, and in fact the craft of glass making was virtually unknown. So he had to import glaziers again from Gaul to come and put windows in his new monastery. So it was quite a grand building compared with similar buildings in the country at that time. He, in particular, developed a great library there, and in search of books he went back to Italy, back to Rome, basically on a book buying trip. When he returned, Extant, who was still king at that time, was equally impressed by Bishop's accounts of what he'd done and the things that he brought back from Italy, and he gave him another tract of land, this time at Jarrow, where Benedict Bishop built a second monastery, this one dedicated to St. Paul, the other one, the original one at Wearmouth, dedicated to St. Peter. And these monasteries gradually became some of the most important centres of Christian teaching and scholarship, not just in England but throughout Europe. In particular, a great library was created, and that did become the best, the largest library of anywhere in Europe at that time. And there was a great tradition of book production at the libraries, the twin monasteries of Jarrow and Wearmouth. At Benedict Bishop's death, a man called Colfrid, who was a friend and someone who travelled to Italy with Bishop, a man called Colfrid, who took over as abbot of the twin monasteries, And he continued Bishop's legacy, particularly with book production. And he started a project in 692 to create 3 great Bibles, 3 copies of the Bible, one for each of the twin monasteries, and the third to be taken to Rome and presented to the Pope. We know it's in 692 because the Venerable Bede, who was a monk at Jarrow, a man of great intellect, an author and a teacher, he recorded in his ecclesiastical history of the English nation that Colfrid had acquired grazing land for 2,000 cattle, and that was the number of beasts that Colfrid decided he needed to produce the parchment for making these 3 great Bibles. It probably took about 10 years to make the Bibles, and in 716 Colfrid finally set off with a group of fellow monks and headed off for Rome to take the presentation copy. Unfortunately, as they travelled overland through France, Colfrid became ill. He was in his early 70s at that time. He suddenly became ill when they reached the Burgundy region, and sadly he died and was buried there in France. His colleagues, however, carried on and took the Bible through to Rome and presented it to Pope Gregory II, where it was warmly received. It was a massive Bible. Each of the 3 copies that were made weighed about 32 kilos each and took 2 people to actually lift it. They weren't particularly illustrated like some other medieval books like the Lindisfarne Gospels or the Book of Kells, which were profusely illustrated and illuminated in what is known as an insular style. Colfrid's Bibles were relatively plain in that respect, but they were written in a beautiful script which was developed called uncial script, which it was all uppercase, it didn't have any lowercase letters, and the words actually weren't separated from one another. And it was developed to speed up the writing process, because of course all books at that time were produced in manuscript form. Rome, in the latter part of the medieval period, came under attack and was besieged on several occasions, and it was felt that it would be best to take the great Bible, Colfrid's Bible, to a remote monastery in Tuscany for safekeeping. And the monastery was situated on the slopes of Mount Amiati, and it's from there that the Bible got the name by which it's now known, the Codex Amiatinus. It remained there for several centuries, and we know it was there in the 11th century because the monastery carried out an inventory of all its books, and it was recorded there. But in the 18th century it was rediscovered and taken from the monastery to Florence, to the Laurentian Library, which is where it lives today. About 100 years later, researchers looking at the Codex Amiatinus, which had been originally thought to be produced in Italy at the Abbey at Monte Cassino, they then realised that an attribution on one of the preliminary pages had been altered, and in actual fact research showed that this was undoubtedly Colfrid's Bible, and that it wasn't made in Italy at all, that it was the one that came from the northeast of England. In the year 2000, the Laurentian Library decided to get a high-resolution digital copy made of the of the Bible. And so you can go to the library now, and there are touch screens around the library where you can scroll through and look at every page of the Bible. In addition, they produced a facsimile copy, which is on permanent display there. The Bede Museum in Jarrow decided that they would like a facsimile copy, and they entered negotiations with the Laurentian Library, and also had to go have a major fundraising exercise to get the money to get a copy, which was finally delivered to them with great ceremony in the year 2016. In 2018, the British Library decided to hold an exhibition of Anglo-Saxon books, and they persuaded the Laurentian Library to let them borrow the codex amiatinus. And it came over to Britain the first time it had been on these shores for just about 1,500 years. So the codex amiatinus is a much travelled book with a fascinating history, but it remains the one surviving, the oldest surviving copy of the Latin Bible. The other two copies, which were made for the twin monasteries in the northeast, nobody knows what happened to them. They probably disappeared when the monasteries were sacked by the Vikings in the 9th century. So the Codex Amiatinus is really one of the great books representative of that age, and a really quite marvellous example of medieval bookbinding and manuscript.